TGCRequiem here with a deck tech for Dredge, Modern Dredge. Um, Basically, it's a graveyard-based deck. I call what I consider like a combo aggro deck. It's an aggro deck that's trying to beat you down with creatures fast, but there's some combo elements, and if you can disrupt those, you can usually disrupt the deck. The way that Dredge works is it has a mechanic on a bunch of the cards, which is what you can see here from Life from the Loam. Life from the Loam has Dredge 3. If you would draw a card, instead you may put exactly 3 cards from the top of your library into your graveyard. If you do, return this card from your graveyard to your hand, otherwise draw a card. So basically the way this deck works is you get the card in the graveyard, and then at your draw step, you, instead of drawing a card, you dredge, which means you'd put, in this case, 3 cards from the top of your library into your graveyard, and then return the Life from the Loam to your hand. And so the hope for this is when you dredge, that you're going to hit certain creatures that when they're in the graveyard, they can be returned to the battlefield essentially for free. So the key ones here are Prized Amalgam. Prized Amalgam is a 3/3 for 3 mana, but whenever you're rarely paying that mana cost here. Basically, it's whenever a creature enters the battlefield, if it entered from your graveyard or you cast it from your graveyard, return Prized Amalgam from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped at the beginning of the next end step. So you can cheat this into play by milling Narcomoeba. When Narcomoeba is put into your graveyard from your library, you may put it onto the battlefield. So again, if you dredge with your Life from the Loam, and there's other cards that dredge, and Narcomoeba enters the graveyard, then from your library, then it will enter the battlefield, or it has the chance to enter the battlefield. You don't have to, but you can have it. And when you do that, that will then trigger Prized Amalgam to enter the battlefield if it's also in the graveyard. Similarly, Bloodghast is a creature. It's a 2/1 that can't block, and it has haste whenever your opponent has 10 or less life, but it has a landfall trigger where whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you may return Bloodghast from your graveyard to the battlefield. And so what you can do is play a land, which then triggers Bloodghast to return to the battlefield from the graveyard, and that in turn triggers your Prized Amalgams that are in the graveyard to return to the battlefield. And then the other one is this one off Haunted Dead. It's a 4 mana 2/2, not that great. When it enters the battlefield, though, you get a 1/1 white spirit creature token with flying, so it's a little bit better. But the big benefit is for 1 and a black, you can discard 2 cards and return Haunted Dead from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped, which again, like everything else that we've mentioned, recurs your Prized Amalgam. And so kind of what this does is this allows you to cheat creatures into play for cheap and sometimes really quickly. You got to get the right cards to dredge out into your graveyard. And to help with that, you have some of the best dredgers there are. Stinkweed Imp is the biggest dredger that still exists within Modern. It has Dredge 5, and it also has Pseudo Death Touch, so it's a 1/2 flyer for 3 mana, which isn't great, but whenever Stinkweed Imp deals combat damage to a creature, destroy that creature. There are definitely spots where you get to the point that you want to hard cast this for 3 mana, to block a Tarmogoyf or something, or to discourage your opponent from attacking with a Death Shadow. But again, when it's in your graveyard, it will dredge in place of a draw spell, or not draw spell, in place of your draw step, 5 cards, which is pretty high odds to hit something. And so you have Stinkweed Imp, which dredges for 5. You have Life from the Loam, which dredges for 3. And then the deck also runs Dark Blast, which dredges for 3, and that's also an instant. Target creature gets -1/-1 until end of turn. One trick you can do with this is if you have multiple black mana up, you can cast this before your draw step to do -1/-1, and then dredge it back to your hand to recast it to kill a 2 toughness creature. The deck also runs Dakmor Salvage, which is a Dredge 2. So the weakest of the Dredge, but it's part of your, you can get it in as part of your mana base, and it also has the benefit of being able to be dredged back to your hand when you want to return Bloodghast from the battlefield. So if you get one into your graveyard, you can dredge it back to your hand, and then all your Bloodghasts, when you play it to the battlefield, all your Bloodghast will return to the battlefield, which in turn will return all your prized amalgams. It's really hard to fight this deck with removal because these creatures die, but it's really easy to draw your next land drop, recur your Bloodghast, therefore recur your prized amalgams, loop them over and over and over, and just kind of keep attacking or keep blocking until you can set up like a Conflagrate combo. Now, Conflagrate is the other finisher, the way the deck likes to finish a lot. And the way Conflagrate works is that it's a red XX spell. So for 5 mana, I could, so long as one of them is red, I could deal X damage divided as I choose among any number of target creatures and or players. So for 5 mana, that'd be X of 2. So 2 and a red is 5 mana. That's going to do 2 damage, spread as you choose amongst players or creatures. Now, where this card gets really fun is in the graveyard, you can flash it back for red and discard X cards, and then you'll do X damage based on the number of cards you discard. Well, Life from the Loam, as you dredge, you're dredging all of these cards in your graveyard, and so what you can do with Life from the Loam is return up to 3 target land cards from your graveyard to your hand. So while you're simultaneously dredging to try and get your creatures on the battlefield to either chump block or aggressively beat down on your opponent, you can also return lands that have been dredged to your graveyard back to your hand, and then load up a hand sometimes as big as 8 or 9 cards in hand on the turn that you then cast a Conflagrate and discard up to 8 or 9 cards, throwing 9 points of damage at your opponent or at the creatures they have on the battlefield. So it's just kind of an extra way to, it gives you reach when maybe the opponent stalls you out with blockers. Narcomoeba has flying, which is also another nice reach capability. Insolent Neonate, has menace, which gives it a little bit of evasion. The other creatures, basically you're just willing to let them die because they're pretty easy to recur. Again, Stinkweed Imp has flying, and the Haunted Dead Spirit Token has flying. So, usually you compare Conflagrate with, the damage you're getting through to kind of finish your opponent off to win the match. Beyond that, the other cards in the deck are all about kind of initiating this process, getting your dredge engine going, if you will. And so those cards are Insolent Neonate, which is a 1/1 for a single red. Again, as I noted, it has menace, which means this creature can't be blocked except by 2 or more creatures. But it has an ability, discard a card and sacrifice Insolent Neonate. So that's the cost. And then after you do that, you can draw a card. Well, the way that this is worded or templated, it means that you could discard your dredger, and then immediately after you discard it, draw that. But instead of drawing it, you would dredge it. So, like, I could take Insolent Neonate, discard a Stinkweed Imp, and then dredge that Stinkweed Imp for the draw step as a part of Insolent Neonate. Since the discard's a part of the cost, it occurs before the benefit happens. So that's one way you can kind of get your dredge engine started. Faithless Looting is another way you can kind of get your dredge engine going, and sometimes it's actually kind of supercharges your dredge process. So, ideally, like turn 1, you may discard a Bloodghast and a Stinkweed Imp, or maybe like a Prized Amalgam and a Stinkweed Imp. And then the next turn, you dredge your Stinkweed Imp, and then Narcomoeba or Bloodghast hits the graveyard. If it's Narcomoeba, it then enters the battlefield, which then returns your Prized Amalgam to the battlefield. Or again, if you were to dredge your Bloodghast, it returns the battlefield, returning Prized Amalgam. Where it gets really fun is with Faithless Looting, is when you already have dredgers in the graveyard, instead of drawing 2 cards then discarding 2 cards, you can dredge in place of those 2 draws. So if I had 2 Stinkweed Imps, I could dredge 5, which is going to bring more cards into the graveyard, and then from there I can choose one of those cards, should another dredger enter the graveyard, and dredge that as the second dredge. and then after that you would discard 2 cards. And again, you're typically discarding a Bloodghast, another Dredger, maybe your Conflagrate, so you can get the cheaper price, or a Prized Amalgam, so that way you can recur those creatures, because you don't want to be casting them out of your hand, at least not the creatures. You want to be casting your spells out of hand, but your creatures, you're wanting to cheat them into the battlefield through the Dredge mechanic. The other card that you have that does this is Cathartic Reunion. Cathartic Reunion is kind of like a mix between Insolent Neonate and Faithless Looting, in the fact that Faithless Looting is draw 2, discard 2, but Neonate allows you to discard and then draw. So Cathartic Reunion kind of is a little bit of both. It allows you to discard 2 cards. In fact, it's a cost of the card. So when you cast it, you have to have 2 cards in hand to discard. And so you discard that as a part of the cost for the card. And then you can draw 3 cards. Well, if you discard 2 cards and you choose to discard a Stinkweed Imp and a Life from the Loam, when you go to draw 3, you can choose one of your draw steps to dredge 5 for the Stinkweed Imp, one of them to draw dredge 3 for the Life from the Loam, and then hopefully within those 8 cards you hit another dredger that you can then dredge some more. And during all that dredging, maybe a Narcomoeba hits the graveyard, therefore it returns to the battlefield, therefore returning your Prized Amalgams to the battlefield at the next end step. So that's kind of how the engine works. And again, as creatures die, it's just really easy with some of this filtering and life from the Loams to kind of get it going. Haunted Dead's also get, the benefit of it is that you can discard 2 cards to return it from the graveyard. So it does 2 things. One, we already talked about how it returns Prized Amalgam to the battlefield, but it also can give you a way to discard cards that you want in your graveyard, like your dredgers. So that's the main deck. You do have a couple Gemstone Mines just as kind of those one-off things where maybe you need, it helps you hit your black mana on occasion, and occasionally you need to cast blue, like hard cast an Amalgam or Narcomoeba. That's very rare. There's one of Collective Brutality. The benefit of Collective Brutality here is that you can discard as a part of the cost, again escalate, which means it can't, the discarding can't be countered, so it's a good way to get a dredger out of your hand. But that's the deck. From here, the sideboard just kind of helps you fight different things, obviously, as most sideboards do. The big thing, though, is Graveyard Hate. You really got to be wary of Graveyard Hate, and so when you're talking about Graveyard Hate, Rest in Peace, which is something Abrupt Decay can destroy, Grafdigger's Cage, which is something Ancient Grudge or Abrupt Decay can destroy. Ancient Grudge also has flashback, so it has the added benefit of, even if Ancient Grudge gets dredged into the graveyard, you can still make use of it, where Abrupt Decay, you have to draw it in hand, which is tough because once you start dredging, you don't stop dredging very often. So long as you've dredged, you tend to hit more dredgers, which means you continue to dredge instead of taking actual draw steps. So Grafdigger's Cage, Tormod's Crypt, Relic of Progenitus, all these graveyard hate cards, that's what the Abrupt Decay and Ancient Grudge are for. Based on what you see, you're going to bring in either Ancient Grudge or Abrupt Decay, maybe on occasion both. Collective Brutality, just kind of a way to help you fight those lower curve aggressive decks that have lower toughness creatures, really good against burn. Gnaw to the Bone, again, something good against burn, and something that you can dredge into your graveyard and then cast it from your graveyard to hopefully gain a lot of life. Thoughtseize is a way to proactively go get those Rests in Peace out of your opponent's graveyard, or not out of their graveyard, out of their hand. So proactively, once they have Rest in Peace down, if you've already set up a bit of a graveyard, it's pretty brutal to lose all of that. So again, the purpose of Thoughtseize is to take that Rest in Peace before they actually get it out of the battlefield, where Abrupt Decay is more reactive. And then finally, the Leyline of the Void is for graveyard decks as well. And the reason we use Leyline here is basically because, again, you're not drawing. You can certainly get to 4 mana, but you're not drawing cards a lot. Once you get the Dredge engine online, you're dredging. And so, and often you're doing this with 2 or 3 mana. You don't need to build up a big base of lands. And so, Leyline, what you want is you just really want to emphasize drawing it in your opening hand to turn off your opponent's graveyard. And then that way you don't have to worry about it the rest of the game. You don't have to worry about trying to get the mana together to hard cast this. Plus, this doesn't empty the graveyard. When it comes into play, it just stops new cards from going to the graveyard. So, but yeah, this is Dredge. It's been powered down a little bit. It had a banning not too long ago. It was a tad overpowered with Golgari Grave Troll, which had Dredge 6, and so they removed that. And since then, this is the list that's kind of appears to be roughly where it's at. I've seen the most results from a list like this out on MTG Goldfish, and so that's the version I played. Hopefully you enjoy it and have a good one.